Since the dawn of humanity, the mystery of miracles has fascinated and inspired. But what if many of these extraordinary events, described in the Bible, also found echoes in modern science? Could it be that God's power manifests not despite natural laws, but through them? The account of Noah's flood, for example, raises an intriguing dilemma: was it merely a metaphor, or is there a real geological event behind the narrative? Throughout this journey, we will explore how faith and science, far from opposing each other, can walk side by side, revealing not the absence of the supernatural, but its most subtle and majestic form. Before there was time, matter, or movement, there was a creative mind, a perfect consciousness that decided to shape the invisible and bring order to the chaos. The Bible states, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Genesis 1 verse 1. For many, this sounds like sacred poetry. But what if, upon looking deeper, we also found the foundations of physics, chemistry, and mathematics? Each word of Genesis hides the complexity of natural laws that would only be described by scientists millennia later. The light that God commanded was not just clarity, it was energy, photons, radiation. It was the activation of physical constants that would give the universe its structure. What if the "let there be light" is also the Big Bang, with God as the author of the explosion? From the first separation between light and darkness to the creation of life, each phase of Genesis can be seen as an ordered sequence, not random, but purposeful. When God created the stars to govern the day and the night, He didn't just place them, He established gravitational cycles, nuclear fusions, and orbital patterns that sustain life to this day. The Earth, perfectly tilted on its axis, orbits at an exact distance from the Sun. Science calls this the habitable zone, faith calls it divine providence. And this providence does not negate natural laws, it anticipates, dominates, and coordinates them. What if every scientific discovery is, in fact, a glimpse into the Creator's mind? Albert Einstein once stated, "I want to know God's thoughts, the rest are details." Science, in its attempt to understand the workings of the universe, is, even if unconsciously, trying to decipher the language of the Creator. DNA, for instance, is a code of billions of letters, a true biological alphabet. For those with faith, there is no code without a coder. Every dividing cell, every star born, every galaxy formed follows principles that God established, and which science humbly tries to understand. What if biology is simply a way to read the book of creation? The harmony between science and faith also appears in the idea of order. The universe is not a disorganized chaos. There is symmetry, cycles, and constant laws. Entropy, the speed of light, gravitational force, all are constants that, if changed even slightly, would make life impossible. This precision is not a result of chance. It reveals that, before anything existed, there was already a supreme intelligence shaping the gears of the cosmos. Science calls this fine-tuning, theologians call it intelligent design. What if natural laws are traces left by God for us to find Him? Finally, it is essential to remember, science is not the enemy of faith, it can be one of its greatest allies. Science answers the how, but only faith answers the why. The universe is a stage masterfully constructed, and each atom, each fossil, each formula can be a reflection of God's grandeur. When we observe the sky, the sea, the human body, we are not just seeing nature, we are contemplating the traces of a divine mind that chose to reveal Himself not only through words but through laws, forms, and rhythms. What if true science is the path to seeing God with deeper eyes? When we think of miracles, we often imagine supernatural interventions that defy the laws of nature. The Red Sea parting, the multiplication of loaves and fishes, or the resurrection of Lazarus. These are events that, at first glance, seem to transcend what science can explain. However, could it be that these miracles were not, in fact, a breach of natural laws, but rather a manifestation of divine action within those laws? The key to this understanding may lie in realizing that God, in creating the world, established the natural laws, and He can operate within them, in ways that may seem extraordinary to us, but are, in reality, reflections of his perfect dominion over creation. Let's consider the example of the crossing of the Red Sea, perhaps one of the most iconic miracles. The Bible describes the waters parting, allowing the Israelites to walk on dry ground. Today, many scientists believe that, under specific conditions, such as a strong and constant wind, it is possible that the sea could have temporarily parted, creating a dry path. However, the scientific explanation alone does not diminish God's act. On the contrary, it highlights his sovereign control over natural forces. The wind that parted the waters was a divine command, not a mere accident of physics. What if this wind was, in fact, God's way of shaping nature to fulfill his will? Another fascinating example is the manna, the heavenly bread that God provided for the people of Israel during their journey through the desert. While some may suggest that manna was a natural substance available in the environment, like sap or edible fungus, this does not diminish the miraculous nature of the event. The manna not only sustained the Israelites for 40 years, but it also appeared in perfect coordination, falling from the sky every morning. There was no natural explanation for this flawless, repeated phenomenon. It was a miracle within the natural order. God used the natural laws of creation to manifest his provision, a supernatural action, but within the boundaries he himself had established. God's power is not limited to what is incomprehensible or irrational. He, the creator of natural laws, can operate them in ways that reveal his infinite wisdom. Jesus, when healing the blind, did not only use the power of touch or prayer, he often said that healing came through faith. While science may explore the effects of the natural substances he used, such as clay or saliva, we must not forget that it was he who was commanding the process. The divine power was not in the natural elements themselves, but in Jesus' authority over them. What if the true nature of the miracle is how God uses natural laws to reveal his grace? It is important to remember that God's action in biblical miracles was never an annulment of natural laws, but a demonstration of his sovereignty over them. Each miracle, even those that seem to transcend the laws of physics, can be seen as a work of the Creator who uses the impossible to reveal his love and power. It does not matter whether the sea parted due to natural or miraculous causes, the real miracle was the divine intervention that made nature respond to his command. Similarly, the multiplication of loaves and fishes is not just a breaking of biological laws, but a demonstration that God has absolute control over every aspect of creation. The miracle is not in defying the laws of nature, but in how he operates within them to fulfill his will. Therefore, miracles do not need to be explained as irrational events or as existing outside of natural laws to be extraordinary. On the contrary, they can be seen as an expression of God's power within the natural order, a way for him to manifest his control over the universe in ways that challenge our understanding, but at the same time, reveal the depth of his love and wisdom. What if science, in attempting to explain miracles, is not distancing us from God, but rather drawing us closer to him? By acting within the natural laws, God reveals himself as the artisan of the universe, the great engineer who established the foundations of the world and, at the same time, governs them with a love that transcends all human understanding. Thus, science, in seeking to understand how God acts in the world, is not an obstacle to faith but a tool that brings us closer to understanding his greatness and the harmony between divine creation and science. God, the creator of all things, established from the beginning the natural laws that govern the universe. These laws did not arise by chance, but are ordered and precise manifestations of the divine mind. Physics, chemistry, biology, and other areas of science are not just descriptions of the world around us, they are reflections of the order established by God, an order that, when understood, reveals his power and intelligence. From the movement of the stars to the structure of an atom, the natural laws demonstrate care and precision that could not be the result of chance. When we consider the physics of subatomic particles or the vastness of the cosmos, it is impossible not to perceive the grandeur of a creator who not only imagined this universe but structured it with laws that allow for its harmony. The principle of gravitation, the conservation of energy, and the constants that govern planetary movements did not emerge from a random sequence of events, but from a divine plan. What if, by studying physics, we are actually studying the reflection of God's mind? In biology, we observe the complexity of life, which, in itself, is a testimony to the Creator's power. Every human cell is a highly organized machine, full of interdependent systems and processes, all governed by natural principles that ensure the maintenance of life. DNA replication, communication between cells, and the functioning of organs are marvelous phenomena that reflect the work of a Creator who is both scientific and loving. God did not create a chaotic world, but a world that operates according to very well-defined rules, and it is in this world that human beings can live, learn, and thrive. What if every cell in our body is an expression of God's desire to create something beautiful and orderly? We cannot overlook the laws of chemistry, which govern the interactions between atoms and molecules. The periodic table, with its elements arranged in a logical and harmonious order, reflects the divine wisdom in the creation of matter. The chemical processes that occur in our bodies, such as the production of energy in the mitochondria, are undoubtedly an example of the greatness of a God who not only created matter but established the laws that govern it and use it to sustain life. The fact that these laws are so consistent and predictable, allowing scientists to formulate precise theories about natural processes, is a demonstration that there is a mind behind them, a mind that is God Himself. What if the chemical harmony of the universe is a divine language that teaches us about the stability and purpose of God? These natural laws, which science seeks to understand and describe, do not diminish God's greatness. On the contrary, they reveal His power in a profound way. When a scientist observes the symmetry of crystals, the precision of planetary orbits, or the functioning of cells, he is, in a sense, contemplating the divine order that permeates the entire universe. The laws of physics and biology are not merely rules that govern the world, they are expressions of God's sovereignty over the cosmos. He, as the creator and sustainer, not only formulated them but also keeps them functioning at every moment. What if, by looking at the laws of nature, we are actually contemplating the signs of the Creator who continues to sustain everything that exists? Although science has advanced immensely, explaining many natural processes, it cannot explain the origin of the laws that govern the universe. The deeper questions about the origin of gravity, dark matter, or life itself remain unanswered. Science can describe how the laws work, but it cannot answer why they exist. The answer to the why of these laws, how the Creator chose to establish such a precise and functional order, is something that transcends scientific explanation and belongs to the realm of faith. What if the reason for everything being as it is simply God's desire to reveal Himself in His perfection? In this way, science is not in opposition to faith. On the contrary, it is a powerful tool that can help us understand the wonder of divine creation. By studying the natural laws, we are, in a sense, studying the mind of the Creator, who thought, designed, and sustained all things. The laws of nature, rather than diminishing divine action, show us how God operates within His creation, guiding the order of the universe with a purpose. Science, when properly understood, reveals the magnificence of God and invites us to worship the Creator, who not only made everything but sustains everything with His infinite power. The line between what is considered a natural phenomenon and a divine miracle is not always clear. In many cases, science tries to explain extraordinary events using the natural laws that govern the world. However, there is something profoundly intriguing about how certain events seem to challenge simple explanations or the limits of human understanding, even when we try to comprehend reality through science. The real question, then, is not whether something can be explained naturally, but how God, through His sovereignty, can act through these laws to fulfill His purpose. A classic example of a situation that challenges this line is the miracle of Joshua, when the Israelite leader made the sun stop in the sky to give the army time to defeat their enemies. The Bible records that the sun and moon stood still for a whole day, allowing the Israelites to win the battle, Joshua 10 verses 12 to 14. For many, this is an undeniable miracle. A phenomenon that contradicts the physics of celestial movement. However, there are theories that attempt to explain this event naturally, suggesting that perhaps Joshua was referring to an atmospheric phenomenon, like a solar eclipse or a temporary change in the weather that caused the daylight to be prolonged. Although the scientific explanation may offer an interesting perspective, there is no doubt that, For the Israelites, this was a miracle, a direct intervention of God in the battle, a way for him to suspend the laws of nature in favor of his people. The question, then, is not whether the event can be explained, but how divine intervention used the natural laws in a way that was visible and effective for those present. What if the true miracle wasn't the sun stopping, but the fact that God coordinated the natural forces in a perfect way to bring victory to his people? Another notable example is the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. In an event recorded in all the Gospels, Jesus feeds a crowd of 5,000 people with only 5 loaves and 2 fish. When we look at this, our minds try to understand how such a miracle could occur within the natural limitations. The scientific explanation might suggest that a sufficient amount of food could have been hidden or secretly distributed, or perhaps something in the context of collective feeding was amplified in such a way that the amount of food appeared to multiply. However, the scientific explanation does not diminish the act of God. Although the multiplication of the loaves and fishes may seem challenging to human logic, it does not transcend divine power, which can operate within the natural laws in a way that humans cannot fully comprehend. When we try to understand this miracle in a more scientific way, the explanation might seem plausible, but even the attempt to explain it reminds us of something essential. God's action does not depend on our understanding, but on his sovereignty. Even if the multiplication could have a plausible explanation, the fact that it happened is the miracle. The true miracle is the way God acts through the laws of nature, giving them a depth and an expansion that surpass any human expectation. This phenomenon leads us to reflect on the nature of miracles in our own lives. How many times have we witnessed situations where God's intervention seems to go beyond logical explanation? The inexplicable healing of a disease, the restoration of a broken relationship, or a providential solution to a financial problem may seem like natural events, but when examined in light of faith, we know they are manifestations of divine action. Science may try to provide explanations for these events, but the true key lies in recognizing God's sovereign control over everything that happens. What if the miracles we witness are not, in fact, breaks with nature, but rather reflections of how God, in his infinite wisdom, uses creation in ways that our human minds cannot understand? Science, in attempting to explain miracles, offers a limited perspective. Although we may understand how natural phenomena work, this does not diminish the greatness of God nor his ability to act within those laws. Instead, it makes us realize that, even within scientific explanations, God's power is still revealed, not as a violation of order, but as a deeper expression of his sovereignty. God does not need to break natural laws to perform his miracles. He can operate within these laws, often in ways that we cannot predict or comprehend. For example, a scientific explanation for the resurrection of Jesus might be proposed as a psychosomatic explanation or based on poorly understood biological phenomena. However, the resurrection, for Christians, is a miracle that goes beyond scientific explanation, as it involves the direct action of God, who brought Jesus back to life. Even if science cannot fully understand it, faith teaches us that the miracle is not in the explanation, but in God's action that operates beyond what we can comprehend. Therefore, instead of seeing science and miracles as opposites, we should see how science can, in fact, help us admire God's power and creativity even more. Nature is the stage on which he performs his works, and the natural laws are the tools he uses to manifest his will. No matter how much science can explain the processes, the true wonder lies in how everything fits together so perfectly, reflecting the infinite wisdom of the Creator. The New Testament is filled with miracles that challenge human understanding. They not only demonstrate God's supernatural power but also invite us to reflect on how science and faith can coexist harmoniously. The key to understanding these miracles is not in the scientific explanation of each one, but in the faith that God is the author behind all things, including the natural phenomena that surround us. One of the most remarkable miracles recorded in the New Testament is the healing of a man born blind by Jesus. In John 9 verses 1 to 12, Jesus not only heals the blind man but also uses natural elements, such as earth and saliva, to perform the miracle. He makes a mixture of mud and saliva and places it on the man's eyes, telling him to wash in the pool of Siloam. The blind man is healed and begins to see. For the scientific mind, there is a possibility that the mud and water may have healing properties or that the human body has an incredible capacity for regeneration. However, the healing was not merely a matter of natural factors, but of God's direct action through Jesus. Science may try to explain the elements, but the miracle itself lies in the way God chose to heal the man. Moreover, this miracle reminds us that while science can explain biological processes, it cannot explain divine intervention. Science might try to detail the mechanism by which the healing occurred, but the miracle is not simply about the elements used, it is about the authority and power of God. When the blind man was healed, he did not only receive physical sight but a new spiritual perspective. He recognized Jesus as the Messiah, and this is the true miracle that transcends simple scientific explanation. Another powerful example of a miracle in the New Testament is the resurrection of Lazarus, recorded in John 11 verses 1 to 44. When Jesus arrives at Lazarus's tomb, he orders that the stone sealing the grave be removed, and with a simple word, he brings Lazarus back to life, even after 4 days of his death. For science, death is an irreversible process, based on biological laws that indicate that vital signs have permanently ceased. There is no plausible scientific explanation for someone to come back to life after such a long time. However, for the Christian faith, the resurrection of Lazarus is an event that demonstrates God's power over death and life. Science can show us how the body decomposes, but it cannot explain how God, in His sovereignty, can reverse this process. Science may be useful to understand how the biology of the body works, but it cannot comprehend the deeper mysteries of how God operates in the world. The miracle of Lazarus is a clear example of how science can study and describe death, but God's power goes beyond any scientific explanation. In both miracles, what is central is not how the miracle occurred, but who is the author of the miracle. Jesus, as the Son of God, had the authority to use natural laws to manifest His divine power. Science may try to make sense of extraordinary events, but it will never be able to capture the full magnitude of what God does through them. This is where the harmony between faith and science meets. Science can provide context and understanding of how the world works, but it is faith that allows us to see beyond the visible, recognizing that God is present and acting in ways that challenge our understanding. The New Testament teaches us that miracles are more than simple interruptions in the natural laws, they are manifestations of God's presence and His will. Jesus did not come to suspend the laws of nature, but to show them in their fullness, revealing the kingdom of God in all its greatness. Science, in trying to understand these events, only brings us closer to the wonder of God's divine creation. Each miracle in the New Testament is an invitation to look beyond the scientific explanation and perceive the direct action of God in the world. Perhaps the greatest miracle is the fact that, even in a world governed by natural laws, God chose to use those same laws to carry out His plans and purposes. And, even though science tries to understand the how, the real question is, who is the who behind all of this? Thus, we can conclude that science and faith are not opposing forces, but can coexist harmoniously. Science helps us understand the methods and processes by which God works in the world, but faith allows us to see His hand in every detail. The true wonder of the miracles in the New Testament is that they are not just inexplicable events. They are signs of a God who is actively involved in His creation and continues to work among us, beyond our scientific understanding. And by recognizing this, we can see how science and faith can walk together, each illuminating the other. As we progress in our understanding of the world around us, science has made impressive advances in explaining many natural phenomena. From the laws of physics to genetics, science provides us with a way to understand how things work. However, when we encounter the deepest mysteries of life and existence, we discover that science, as remarkable as it is, has its limitations. The true greatness of God is beyond our scientific comprehension. The very nature of God is something that escapes complete human understanding. He is eternal, without beginning or end, beyond space and time, transcending everything we know and experience. Science can show us how the universe works, but it will never be able to comprehend the essence of God, who is beyond all natural laws. If we think of God as the creator of everything, any attempt to explain his actions solely through scientific processes will be incomplete, as he is beyond the reach of human science. However, science, by its very nature, seeks to understand the world in terms we can measure and observe. The scientific approach is limited to things we can see, touch, and test. Spirituality, on the other hand, deals with what is invisible, with what cannot be measured by human instruments. Therefore, while science may provide us with a vast number of explanations about the how of things, it cannot tell us the why of many things, especially in regard to God's supernatural acts. An example of this is the very creation of the universe. Science can explain how the Big Bang gave rise to the cosmos and how stars and planets formed, but it cannot tell us why the universe exists in the first place or what the purpose of its creation was. The origin of the universe, for science, is a great question, but there is still no complete explanation revealing the reason why everything we see was created. The Bible teaches us that God created the universe with a purpose. For his glory and for humanity. This is beyond the scope of science, which can only offer hypotheses about how the universe came to be. In many ways, science attempts to fill gaps in our knowledge, but questions about the existence of God and the reasons why he acts in certain ways remain beyond the reach of any scientific experiment. A scientific explanation, for example, may explain how a disease is cured or how a cell regenerates, but it cannot answer the question about God's supernatural power in healing or restoring a human being. When Jesus healed the sick or performed miracles, scientific explanations might attempt to make sense of the how of the healing, but the why and the nature of the miracle are incomprehensible without a divine understanding. Moreover, science is constantly evolving. What is considered a scientific fact today may be challenged and changed with new discoveries. This means that science is limited, always subject to revisions and updates. However, God's nature, his truth, and his divine acts remain unchangeable. In other words, science can bring us closer to understanding the world we live in, but it can never provide a complete explanation of God's infinite power and wisdom. Faith, in turn, is a way of understanding realities that transcend scientific explanation. God calls us to trust in him, even when we cannot fully comprehend his ways. As the prophet Isaiah said, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways," Isaiah 55 verse 8. Faith allows us to recognize that, while science may explain aspects of the natural world, divine truth goes beyond what we can know. In the end, science does not diminish God's sovereignty, it only shows us the complexity and beauty of his creation. However, it cannot capture the totality of what God does. He acts in ways that often challenge human logic, and as much as science may try to unravel these mysteries, it will never be sufficient to fully comprehend God. This leads us to a point of reflection: if science, with all its progress, cannot fully explain God's actions, it means that we are dealing with a being whose ways and thoughts are infinitely greater than our capacity to comprehend. Therefore, when reflecting on the relationship between science and God, we must recognize the human limitations in the face of divine greatness. Science can offer us many answers, but it will never be able to answer all the fundamental questions about life, creation, and the nature of God. This is where faith comes in, because while science helps us understand the how, it is faith that allows us to grasp the why. And thus, we walk toward the knowledge of God, not only through reason but through trust in the mystery and the power he manifests in our lives. Ultimately, science will never be enough to explain God, because God transcends everything we know and understand. He is beyond our ability to measure, control, or comprehend, and this is precisely what makes his action in miracles and in the world an expression of his infinite greatness. Throughout this journey, we explored how science can help us understand many aspects of the natural world, but we also reflected on its limitations in the face of God's infinite power. While science seeks to explain the how of things, it cannot grasp the depth of the divine why. Every miracle, every action of God, is a reminder that, despite our advances in knowledge, there are mysteries that escape our comprehension. God acts beyond what science can observe or measure, and even when we attempt to find natural explanations for extraordinary phenomena, the truth remains: He is the creator and sustainer of everything, and His action in the world goes beyond what we can control or understand. Science can indeed illuminate many aspects of reality, but God's action transcends all the natural laws that science tries to explain. Thus, the great lesson is that, while we seek knowledge, we must maintain humility in the face of divine mysteries. Science is a powerful tool, but it is faith that allows us to recognize God's presence and sovereignty in all things. He, who created the laws of nature, is the same who performs wonders beyond our understanding. So, as we reflect on the interaction between science and faith, the true question remains: how far can science take us if there are mysteries that can only be understood through unwavering trust in God? Science may try to explain, but God, in His infinite greatness, remains beyond our capacity for human understanding. Science may try to explain, but God remains beyond our comprehension. What do you think of this interaction between faith and science?